Well, I grabbed 2 trays off the shelf, and I grabbed a tray that I wrapped. And then I showed them the incorrect way, and I showed them the correct way on the aseptic technique of opening it, and they understood more in detail why they had to be wrapped a certain way, and the steps were leading up to that final taping of the package. So it all goes back to education. It's not just a one-time education, and you're done. I think it needs to be done annually.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Joining us this week on Beyond Clean is Sean Weir, System Sterile Processing Educator, UPMC, and we are talking about surgical instrument wrap, aka blue wrap, even though it's not always blue. Bobby, are you ready for this?
Absolutely. I think this is every technician's favorite, or I don't know, I guess maybe not favorite, maybe it's their least favorite consumable to deal with. This is our badge. This is who we are, sterile processing technicians. We wrap our Christmas presents in the stuff. We take the leftover stuff and use them as moving blankets, but how successfully you can get those crisp corners on your wrap is really a badge of honor for our technicians. So this ought to be a fun one as we talk to an educator about the rights and wrongs of blue wrap.
Yeah, y'all can't see this because I know we're audio, but Bobby is wearing one of those blue wrap uniforms. You know how they like take the blue wrap and they create like prom outfits and stuff. He's wearing a blue wrap tuxedo with like a little white bow tie. It looks fantastic. No, but just kidding. But Bobby's right. This is a cultural piece of sterile processing. When you think SPD, you think blue wrap. So we're really excited to spotlight his particular consumable on today's episode with Sean. So hang with us and we'll be right back.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now, System Educator Sean Weir with UPMC. Y'all know Sean. You've seen him. You heard him. If you're on LinkedIn, you've read him. If you're out in Pennsylvania, you may belong to his chapter out there. So he's got a lot of connections in the space. But you may not know what we're going to talk about in terms of blue wrap and his background with blue wrap as a consumable in the space. I won't spoil the surprise. We'll save that for a little bit later, Sean. But welcome to this podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me again, Hank. I appreciate it.
So we're in the season on sterile processing consumables. We're talking about things that are used up and consumed, I guess you could say single use, but not in terms of instrumentation per se, in terms of everything else that we got to use to get those instruments from dirty to clean to sterile. And one of those things, surprise, surprise, is this blue wrap that we use in sterile processing. It's pretty iconic. At the recording of this episode, I just auctioned off my red hat, also kind of iconic. But, you know, when you think sterile processing, I'd say you think about two things: the surgical instruments and probably blue wrap. So what is this blue wrap, Sean, that we're talking about for maybe if they're brand new students or if there's folks tuning into this that never been in a sterile processing department before? What is this blue wrap?
So blue wrap is a one-time consumable made of polypropylene fibers, material, little blue beads that come in by the train load and they unload it and they make the blue wrap.
I'm assuming the blue wrap comes from the name, right? It's blue, but that's not the only color out there in this space. What are some other kinds of colors that you may see out there?
So there's pink, white, there's obviously the blue. Those are about the three main colors you'll see out in our industry.
So talk to me about how this is used. In the name, obviously, it has the word wrap. So I'm assuming that we're doing something with that. We're not wrapping, R-A-P, or wrapping, W-R-A-P-P-I-N-G. But yeah, how is this used? Where is this used in the department? And when we're making decisions in regards to packaging, why would we decide to go with blue wrap as opposed to something else?
That is the biggest debate ever, Hank. Blue wrap can be used in numerous things in our departments, from wrapping up loaner trays, vendor trays, however you want to call them, to general instrument sets or smaller items such as, if you do towel packs, round drawers, kerosens, small things like that. But in addition to that, when you're wrapping up a metal basin, you're using the blue wrap of any sort, and that is then going to be used on the operating room potentially as the sterile field.
Speaking of iconic, one of the most famous Beyond Clean events that we ever had was a myth-busting event back in 2018, where we went through 3 different types of packaging methods. Of course, a blue wrap was one of those, a traditional container, rigid container, and then the new one-tray container at that time that was on the market, or that was fairly new to the market still in 2018. And, that debate was really interesting because it brought up, some of the things that you just kind of alluded to, Sean, that this is one of the biggest debates in the industry on what kind of packaging method do you use, when and why and how. So if there's any folks tuning in who have not seen or listened to that debate, we do have videos on it on our YouTube channel. We converted it into podcast as a 2-part podcast season, so you can look that up on the podcast app. Just search for Myth Busting. But come back to you, Sean. The sizes that we would commonly see of this wrap. You let us know colors. You're going to usually blue. You may see some pink and some white. What about sizes? What are the kinds of sizes that are common out there?
So sizes range by what you're doing. Typically, you'll see 18 by 18, 24 by 24, 36 by 36. You get 45, 48. I prefer the 48 to the 45 to get a little extra room in there. You get the 54s for your taller, vendor trays or some of your oddball trays, like the knee positioner. And you have other kind of wraps out there too that are different sizes and are wrapped in a different sequence than you would normally with sequential wrap.
It's funny, the wrapping technique tends to be a point of pride for sterile processing technicians, right? Everybody's kind of got their own tips and tricks for how they do that. Put your elbow here, fold this flap this particular way. But even more so than just kind of that personal pride and preference, as you just alluded to, there are a bunch of different methods, or at least a few different approved and recommended methods out there for getting a good sterile barrier when you wrap it. Would you break down what those different methods might be?
So, yeah, it's an AMI-ST 79, Section 9.6, talks about all the wrapping methods and how to correctly wrap items. And you touch base, Bobby, on, and Hank, the pride people have online about wrapping. And my biggest pet peeve is, show me the first fold. Because if you look in the IFU for a wrap, if you look in the ST 79, Section 9.6, you'll see that the first fold has to go up and over the complete package. Can't have it to the top. You can't have it where the tray is still showing, because that's not providing the protection barrier for your patient and then deeming an unsterile tray. But you have, square fold, envelope fold. There's a square fold, I think it's called, out there. And there's something else out there it's brand specific. So it's really just those 4 kinds of folds that we'll see in our industry.
No, that's perfect. And I guess which one of those that you use, whether it's, made specifically for loaners, or if it's an envelope fold, or if it's that square fold that you mentioned, it's all kind of specific on what your particular needs are, and any of those could be acceptable. I love that you brought up that first point about how to select the right size wrap, because you're right. If that first fold doesn't go all the way over the container, you could still wrap the tray and make it look pretty, and nobody would know without taking it apart. But that is an indication that you're working with too small of a wrap and you need to go up a side. So thanks for bringing that out. That's not the only misstep that can happen when somebody comes to the table to wrap a tray. And so in addition to that one, any common mistakes or misconceptions about wrapping that you want to highlight for our listeners?
Oh, of course. So the thing we know, we need to care about the surge tech or nurse that are opening up the package in their room. So with that being said, if you're doing envelope fold, you want to make sure you have the courtesy folds inside the top layer. That way they can aseptically open up that tray without compromising it. Again, that first fold that goes up and over should come back up on top. So then the nurse or tech can pull it open and not compromise their field. And another thing I always see, which should never occur, is taping inside of a wrap. Taping the two folds across so they don't come apart. Taping or tucking underneath the tray. That can actually compromise the sterility of a tray when you're opening it. Are two main parts that I would say they're done more often than we like to admit in our industry.
I want to touch on that one more time just to make sure that it's super clear. You mentioned a courtesy fold in there, and I know exactly what you're talking about, but I want to make sure that that's really clear what you mean by that and why that's so important for technicians to think about. Not just how do I get this thing closed, but how do I take care of that OR tech who's trying to get this thing open?
Mm-hmm. So again, when you go over the first fold, you come back up and top. So you have a little tongue or a little triangle at the top. And when you fold your left or right side, depending on what side you do, you want to fold it back and forward again to kind of create a little safety handle for them to pull open aseptically so they're not reaching across and over top, left, right, wherever it may be. Again, it's about making it easy for us, but making it even easier for the nurse, the surge tech, or doctor even to open up that tray for the person who is scrubbed in.
Yeah, Sean, that point is well taken, and it brings us back to a conversation that comes up often on the show about training, I guess I should, orienting the sterile processing staff to the operating room as a part of their training, because you're right. If you've just never even considered the context that this tray is going to be opened in, you're not necessarily wrapping with that understanding in mind or with that in view. But if you can see them try to open up a tray that's been wrapped correctly with a lot of courtesy folds or incorrectly with the tucks and the bins and everything else, and they're trying to open this thing sterilely and they're failing, it becomes, real life at that point. Like, this is not just a preference or, hey, this is the way that my trainer wants me to do it. It's like, no, this actually has a clinical impact to the whole process here, because if I do this poorly and they contaminate the tray when they're opening, it's all for naught. So, that's a very important call out. Going back though to the sizing and, to what Bobby brought up too, that you spoke on, that pride in the aesthetics of the wrap. So you get all those videos and all those pictures of grade me on my wrap. How does this look? We want it to look good. But my question for you is on the spacing and sizing, right? So like you said, the first fold has to be good. Is there such a thing as too tight? If it's too loose and like a little baby elephant can fit in there, then we know that's not good. But can you wrap it too tight and like the corners look primo, but it's still missing the mark?
So, going back to sterilization, and, it's not technically called out as being too tight, but being too tight can actually increase having holes or tears in them whenever they're being placed around your department, properly or improperly, because, it's like a wrapped gift, right? Banging around is going to get a tear in it. So too tight, yeah, it looks nice, but it is more susceptible to having a hole, tear, or an abrasive strike through.
So I hate to bring up the P word. We're so sick of hearing about pandemic, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. One of the unique experiences in the pandemic was the substitution for the standard wraps that many folks went through. And I feel like I wasn't working in a department during the pandemic. We were already out here doing Beyond Clean, but the feedback I heard was for a lot of folks, that was the first time that they really considered not all wrap is created equal. I'm wondering if you could speak to, some of the lessons that were learned in that process of experiencing new products and different products that you haven't used before. What became very important and unique, again, about the specific wraps that you may use?
Well, I can't speak to the pandemic because, unfortunately, for a system that I work for, we are so large. We actually have a warehouse kind of stocked full of wraps for us to utilize. We did get low, but then the raw materials started coming back around and we were okay. But I can speak to the mission trip I just got back from. So I just got back from Antigua, Guatemala, and we did 48 new joints on patients down there. And during that trip, we had two different kinds of wraps. And day one, brand A, no issues. Day two, we just switched to second brand, and a lot of holes, a lot of strike throughs. And the care and handling was the same individual, so nothing changed on that avenue. The trays were all the same 3 trays per patient. And then we switched on halfway through day 2 back to the first brand of the wrap. And for the rest of the trip, no holes, no issues after that. So not all wrap is created equal. Their plyness and the weight per each wrap is not the same between manufacturers. So that's something I learned that I didn't understand up until just 2 weeks ago.
So you mentioned the durability a few times about strike-throughs and abrasive contact, and that is one of the really important considerations with wrap. I mean, what good is it if we can get it wrapped up all nice and pretty and get it sterilized if we can't keep it sterile once it starts getting handled and gets put on the shelf? And so that's an important discussion to have. So as we think about the different plies that you can order a wrap in, or the different weights that can be ordered, like that's something very important to pay attention to as you're doing the ordering process. Can you tell us a little bit about how many layers are typical, or how many plies is typical to see in a disposable blue wrap? And is there any particular standard about how many somebody should be using and the reason for that?
So most wrap out there is 2-ply. You can still purchase single-ply wrap out there, but then again, most hospitals then take that single-ply and double wrap it anyways. So it doesn't make sense to buy that single wrap. All the manufacturers do sell single-ply and double-ply, full disclosure, but some brands actually are 3-ply out there as well in some areas of their wrapping. So it's a little heavier design for those vendor trays with key areas. You can get weight from 100 up to, I believe it's 600 weight. And it's really just the thickness of the wrap. But it doesn't matter how thick it is. If a nurse, surge tech, SPD technician, professional wants to bang those trays around, it doesn't matter what weight you have, it's going to have a hole in it.
That's right. It all comes down to care and handling. But there are some things that we can do along the way. And that discussion around wraps is an interesting one, and weights of wraps, because I'm pretty confident that a lot of our listeners haven't looked with too much depth into that. They think, a 36 inch by 36 inch wrap is the same with any particular company. But you're right. You can order that same size in a number of different weights. And if you look carefully into the IFUs of your wrap manufacturer, you're likely to find recommended package weights or content weights for each of those thicknesses of wrap. So you very well may have some sterile sets in your sterile storage right now that are overweight for the recommended packaging capacity for the wrap that you use to wrap it. And so it would take a pretty educated and scrutinous surveyor to get to that level of detail and find some non-compliance in your department. But that may be a Sean Weir non-compliance tip for you to look into. What weight of wraps are you using in your department, and compare that to how heavy of the things are you putting inside of them? So as you mentioned, care and handling, and that nurse who's just, full on tossing the tray into the case cart to move it. Or I don't know, in my experience, it's usually the orthopedic vendors that are doing that with those big heavy trays. What are some of the things that you've seen be successful to help hospitals with that care and handling issue, and to try to cut back on some of those punctures and tear-throughs?
Just education. Educate the OR at least once or twice a year. They have a high turnover right now. Like like, we do in SPD. So educate the OR and the surge techs on why it's crucial to not slam that tray around, not to bang it around. And then they wonder why we have a high hole risk at locations. Well, how are you handling your trays? Let's walk through the day. And also education on the SPD end. I was at a location and they didn't understand why they had to wrap a tray the way it has to be wrapped, right? Well, I grabbed 2 trays off the shelf and I grabbed a tray that I wrapped. And then I showed them the incorrect way and I showed them the correct way on the aseptic technique of opening it. And they understood more in detail of why they had to be wrapped a certain way. And the steps were leading up to that final taping of the package. So it all goes back to education. It's not just a one-time education and you're done. I think it needs to be done annually.
I want to put you on the spot here, Sean, with an opinion, right? So I know you're not speaking on behalf of any system or the industry, but you probably have an opinion just because you worked in this space and because you've been doing blue wraps, forever, right? As long as you've in an SPD. There's a number of solutions out there on the market today. Like, we won't have to talk about brands, but just ideas to try to guard against the holes that you're talking about, right? So the education piece, the most important in the whole process, completely agree with that. But there's also the product piece or the solution piece that you do see out on the market today. What are your opinions about the things that maybe work the best? We don't have to say the ones that don't work. Maybe we'll just say the ones that you like to supplement your blue wrap. And that can be either things that are in the process of assembling and wrapping, or even on the sterile storage side or the transport side. You want to call out any of those? So
again, education, 100% key. And you hit that, right on the head there, Hank. But alongside of that, your shelving units, 100% that plays a huge part in it. Are you stacking your blue wraps? That goes against the IFU of all wraps. Are they being stacked close to rigid pans? The new racks out in the market kind of help alleviate that questionability. Can you still get a hole in it? Sure. Does the tray move around 5 times a week? There's a possibility of a hole. But if that tray is used one time and is opened up, your chance of having a hole with the newer racks out there, I would say it's a reduction by like 80-95%, unless the tray's moved around a lot within a week.
And what about the ancillary things you would put underneath the tray or around the tray or around the wrap, even on the outside? Do you think those are generally good ideas, or are you more kind of a traditionalist of, hey, let's just wrap this well and do good education and then let it flow? Where do you stand on that?
I'm an old school person. I don't look like it, but I like just wrapping my trays with just a tray line underneath it and calling it a day. But I know facilities love having corner protectors, but what I found, even with corner protectors out there on the market, they take that tray and pop it up about a ½ inch, quarter inch, eighth inch, and then you create a space where there's nothing there, and if you hit it down, it can easily create a hole. So again, it comes down to what you like. But education, proper care and handling of loading, unloading of racks, low-temp sterilizers is all key.
So what about, it's kind of going back to the beginning here, but obviously there's a role to play for the single-use blue wrap in a department. So if you're the manager or the educator and you're looking at your inventory, what is going to make you decide to use blue wrap as opposed to maybe some of the other packaging methods on certain trays? Like, what are you kind of thinking through? What's that process where you decide that?
Well, it comes down to really a budgetary standpoint. We all know that rigid pans have a capital expense to it, and they also have a lot of maintenance and upkeep. Every time you use the tray, it has to be inspected, and you're getting the proper seal. With a wrap, you have some waste after a case, but you're getting a new product every single time. I'm not saying you're not getting that with a rigid pan, but again, if you change your lids from an old bottom to a new top, and then this new top, new bottom, you're not getting the same consistent product and level of protection as you will with a wrap. That's just a quick rundown. Now, again, wraps do have flaws too. Again, it's just like wrapping a present. It can be easily, that level of protection can be easily broken by a rip, tear, slice, or a strike through.
Yeah, it's a manual process. And anytime you introduce humans into it, there's opportunities for error. And I think you're right. I think that's also why we've seen the market shift so much from the reusable materials and woven materials to these non-woven spun bond polypropylene disposable wraps, because you get that really good protection and you have a brand new product every time. So in a lot of cases, it does make a lot of sense. And even with those rigid containers that you mentioned, or the newer solutions that are multi-tray sterilization systems, even those folks would mention that there's still a place for having that flexibility of having a wrap that you can wrap some wonky sized one-off stuff in the facility. So I don't think Blue Wrap's going away anytime soon, but I'm curious what your thoughts are since it's here to stay. What does the future look like for Blue Wrap in the hospital? Any new technology you want to see come down the pike, or anything that you think might be changing in the time to come?
Love the trick questions. I think there is some new things coming out, potentially down the pipeline that will give Blue Wrap a run for its money and rigid pans a run for its money. Nice. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see that potentially come out. I don't know if it will or not. I really hope it does.
That's pretty exciting. I mean, that's bold. That's bold. That's big.
I don't think wraps are ever going to go away truly again, but I think that some of the manufacturers, need to look at the usability and how can we make wrap better, maybe a little thicker, or maybe some of the sweet spots be wider, make it more acceptably sound for the end user to open.
I like that. Have you had any experience dealing with any of these recycling programs that try to help limit the impact just ecologically that using a disposable wrap might have?
A long time ago I did, and it was a hard upkeep being an orthopedic center. I don't think, it was worked out the best. I'm not sure how it works now, but I do know the recycling program. I know how it works, and, it can be beneficial if there's a lot of buy-in to keep it there. But keep in mind that if it is introduced to fire burn, blood, prep, or anything like that, they won't take it. So that is one of the caveats to it.
Yeah, so it sounds like, just thinking about the future, that could be a big opportunity as well, because there are great systems out there and processes out there for doing that. But to your point, and just from what I've heard talking with folks, it sounds like that's a pain in the neck, or as it is today, of getting that off the ground and educating and keeping it going. And gosh, that should be something that is a little simpler, a little cheaper, a little easier for everybody to take into consideration.
So, Sean, it wouldn't do justice to have this interview without telling folks why you are a kind of Blue Wrap royalty, if you will. So where did this, let me rephrase this. How did you reach the pinnacle of instrument Blue Wrap in the sterile processing industry in this country? What was that journey like for you?
Man. Well, so, during the conferences in the past, they had a wrapping contest, and I did not win a single one of them due to the restrictions and or laws or how they were judging it. So it was supposed to be aseptically sound, OR ready. I did that. Other contestants did not do that, and they had a faster time frame, where mine was OR ready, aseptically sound. With that being said, I still throw out a challenge to anybody. Now, I haven't wrapped a tray in probably about a year, but since the one brand has come out, no one has ever been able to beat me in wrapping that wrap, and probably since 2013 when it first came out, I think it came out. And the fastest time that has been recorded of me wrapping a tray aseptically sound, already, is 5.65 seconds. So, someone came very close, 5.9 seconds, but I still have my claim to fame.
So the gauntlet has been thrown down, ladies and gentlemen. The next conference that you see Sean at, you just bend over and then pull out 2 wraps out of your backpack and say, you got yourself a challenge, buddy. Let's see this thing in action. Sean, that's a great story, man. And that's the reason, obviously, when I thought about this topic, I knew that you had a passion not only for the speed of this particular consumable, but the quality, the place that it serves in our industry and in our departments. You did a terrific job on this conversation today. So thank you for your time and your insight.
No, thank you, sir.
And that was Sean Weir, System Educator, Sterile Processing, UPMC. Bobby, great conversation today on a lot of topics. We could have went another hour, probably just talking about all the different intricacies around Blue Wrap and the process and the workflow and the training and the uh-ohs. But I think we hit a lot of the big high points. What was the biggest takeaway for you that you kind of walk away saying, yeah, I'm glad he said that?
Well, first of all, I didn't know that we were talking to Sterile Processing royalty while we were having the conversation. Yeah, I really like Sean's focus on education. You know, that is his role. So I'm unsurprised that that's his position to take on it. He's traveled, you know, across his region. He's got a number of hospitals, you know, tens of hospitals, maybe in the 100 range to take care of. And so that education piece is really important about the care and handling. And about the product selection, I thought that was really good. I knew that we weren't going to get through one of these consumables without bringing up, like, read the IFU to make sure that you've got the right product in your hands. And so I appreciate him bringing that up. And I don't know, as I responded to that and talked about woven materials, I don't want to give the impression that a reusable product like a rigid container or even a reusable wrap doesn't give you that appropriate sterility assurance, because certainly they do when they're used appropriately, but there definitely are some advantages to getting that single use product that you know is right every time with no maintenance. So I thought all of those things were great. I don't know that I can pick just one.
Yeah, you know, the pandemic question was kind of interesting. Obviously, he gave a different answer than what I thought he was going to give, because he basically said, oh, yeah, you know, we planned pretty well, so it didn't really have an impact. And I was like, well, hey, that's a great takeaway. Let's all plan well, because these back orders still today are not quite going away completely. And, you know, going back to what you were just saying, Bobby, the place of a diversity of packaging potential methods in your department. How many times, right, have we come through with the tray and we're like, oh man, we don't have this size blue wrap. Well, isn't it nice to have a rigid container that can still fit in, even if it's a one time that it's normally wrapped, but now you're going to containerize it for this one trip to the OR. It's nice to have a backup. So yes, whatever process or product that you end up doing on the consumable side, it's probably not a good idea to put all your eggs in that one basket and not have any options for emergency processing. So that was my big takeaway. Planning is key. No surprise there, but you're right. Great conversation, great focus on education today from Sean. So that's going to do it for this episode. Just want to remind you, like we do every week here at Beyond Clean, number one, thank you for listening. And number two, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.